The sun was just beginning to rise over the sprawling zoo, casting long shadows across the enclosures as the first sounds of the animals waking up filled the air. Visitors wouldn't arrive for hours, but behind the scenes, the day had already begun. Among the many animals housed in the zoo, there was one that had recently captured everyone's attention, a tiny, wide-eyed baby animal, barely old enough to walk, who had quickly become a favorite among the staff and the few visitors lucky enough to catch a glimpse. Its innocence and playful antics brought smiles to everyone's faces. But not everything was as it seemed. The zookeeper who had been entrusted with the baby animal's care was a respected figure among his peers. To the outside world, he appeared dedicated, often seen tending to the animals with what seemed like genuine affection. Yet, behind the closed doors of the zoo's private areas, there was a different story unfolding, one that would shock and anger anyone who cared about the well-being of animals. It all started with a single video. A famous athlete known for their love of animals and advocacy for wildlife had visited the zoo on what seemed like a casual trip. They had come to see the baby animal, having heard about its charm and the joy it brought to visitors. As they approached the enclosure, they noticed something that didn't sit right, a moment so brief and subtle that most people would have missed it. But this athlete, with their keen eye and strong sense of justice, couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. The baby animal, usually lively and curious, seemed unusually timid. Its movements were hesitant, and there was a sadness in its eyes that didn't belong there. The athlete couldn't shake the image from their mind, and as they continued to observe, they began to notice patterns, small but telling signs that something was amiss. They decided to dig deeper, using their platform and influence to uncover the truth. What they discovered was more troubling than they could have imagined. Through a combination of surveillance, interviews, and careful observation, they began piecing together a story that painted a much darker picture of the zookeeper's treatment of the baby animal. The athlete knew they couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about one animal, it was about exposing a system that allowed such behavior to go unnoticed. But exposing the truth wouldn't be easy. The zoo was a beloved institution, and the zookeeper had a reputation to protect. As the athlete prepared to go public with their findings, they faced resistance at every turn. Would the world believe them? Could they bring justice to the baby animal and ensure no other creatures suffered the same fate? Stay tuned as we uncover the full story, revealing the heartbreaking truth and the extraordinary lengths one person went to for the sake of an innocent life. The athlete couldn't stop thinking about the baby animal. That timid look, the way it seemed to shrink back instead of exploring its surroundings like a healthy, happy creature, should it all felt wrong. Over the next few days, they replayed the moments they'd witnessed at the zoo in their mind, trying to make sense of what they had seen. They started researching the zoo's history, its reputation, and, most importantly, the people who worked there. The zoo had always been a local favorite, known for its family-friendly atmosphere and educational programs. It had a strong following on social media, with photos of its animals often going viral. But as the athlete dug deeper, they began to notice cracks in the perfect image. There were a few scattered reviews and posts from visitors who mentioned seeing animals that looked stressed or underweight. Most of these complaints had been buried under the zoo's glowing publicity, but they stood out to the athlete like red flags. What troubled them most, though, was the zookeeper assigned to care for the baby animal. His name popped up frequently in interviews and promotional material, always described as a passionate advocate for wildlife. Yet, something about his demeanor during the athlete's visit had felt off. He had been polite but distant, brushing off questions about the baby animal's care with vague answers. When asked why the animal seemed so reserved, he had laughed it off, saying, "Oh, it's just shy." They're like that at this age. The athlete wasn't convinced. They decided to return to the zoo, this time blending in with the crowd to observe without drawing attention. Armed with a notebook and a quiet determination, they spent hours watching the baby animal's enclosure. What they saw only deepened their concern. The baby animal rarely moved from a corner of its enclosure, its small body huddled against the wall as if trying to make itself invisible. When the zookeeper entered the enclosure, the animal flinched, its tiny legs trembling as it tried to back away. The zookeeper's tone was sharp, his movements brisk and impatient. He seemed more interested in completing his tasks quickly than in interacting with the animal. The athlete's heart ached, watching the scene unfold. They knew animals couldn't speak for themselves, but their body language said everything. This wasn't shyness, it was fear. The athlete decided it was time to take action. They reached out to a trusted friend, a wildlife expert who had years of experience working with animals in captivity. The friend agreed to visit the zoo under the guise of a regular visitor and assess the situation. When they met afterward, the friend confirmed the athlete's worst fears. "That baby animal is under stress," they said, their voice heavy with concern. "It's not being treated right. I don't know exactly what's happening behind the scenes, but this isn't normal behavior." With this confirmation, the athlete knew they couldn't stay silent. They began documenting everything: photos, videos, notes from their observations. They also started talking to former zoo employees, hoping to find someone who could shed light on what was happening. One former worker who wished to remain anonymous revealed troubling details. "That zookeeper, he's not who he pretends to be," they said. "He has a temper, and he doesn't like being questioned. I've seen him lose his patience with the animals before, especially the younger ones. He thinks no one's watching when he's in the back areas." The athlete felt a mix of anger and determination. They couldn't believe someone entrusted with the care of innocent animals could behave this way, but they also knew they needed more evidence before they could expose the truth. To gather more information, the athlete enlisted the help of their social media followers. Without revealing too much, they asked if anyone had noticed anything unusual during visits to the zoo. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who shared their own observations. Some had seen animals pacing endlessly. Others described moments that had made them uncomfortable, but that they had dismissed at the time. One message stood out. It came from a local photographer who had been documenting the zoo for years. They offered to share their collection of photos and videos, many of which captured behind-the-scenes moments. The athlete eagerly accepted, and what they found in those images painted a clearer picture of the zookeeper's behavior. There were photos of the zookeeper handling animals roughly, his face set in a scowl. In one video, he could be heard yelling at an animal that wasn't cooperating during a training session. While none of this was outright abusive by legal standards, it was enough to show a pattern of neglect and impatience, far from the loving care the zoo claimed to provide. The athlete knew they were getting closer to the truth, but they also realized the risks involved. The zoo had a strong reputation to protect, and any accusations against it would be met with fierce resistance. They had to be strategic in how they approached the situation. As they prepared to take the next step, they couldn't shake the image of the baby animal's frightened eyes. This wasn't just about exposing one person's wrongdoing, it was about standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. The athlete was determined to see this through, no matter how difficult it became. But just as they were starting to feel confident, an unexpected development threatened to derail their efforts. The athlete had never felt this level of pressure before. Their career had taught them to thrive under the spotlight, to perform when the stakes were high, but this was different. This wasn't about winning a game or setting a record, it was about saving a life, maybe more than one. Every piece of evidence they uncovered made the situation feel heavier. The baby animal's fearful eyes haunted their thoughts, pushing them forward even when doubt crept in. The zoo, unaware of the investigation, continued its usual operations. Families came and went, laughing and snapping photos of the animals. The baby animal's enclosure remained a popular stop, but the athlete noticed how carefully the zookeeper seemed to manage the public's view. Whenever visitors approached, his demeanor shifted. He became overly cheerful, talking loudly about the baby animal's progress and how much he cared for it. The athlete recognized it as a performance, a carefully crafted facade meant to distract from the truth. Behind the scenes, the athlete was working tirelessly. They had connected with a journalist known for uncovering injustices in the animal care industry. Together, they began piecing together a story that could expose not just the zookeeper, but the broader issues within the zoo. The journalist, impressed by the athlete's determination, agreed to help anonymously for now, fearing backlash if the zoo caught wind of their plans too early. As the investigation deepened, the athlete received an unexpected tip. A current employee of the zoo, someone who had been quietly observing the zookeeper's behavior, reached out through an anonymous message. They claimed to have witnessed several incidents involving the baby animal moments that made their stomach turn, but that they felt powerless to stop. The message ended with a chilling line: "If you want proof, check the storage room behind the main enclosure. You'll find what you're looking for there." The athlete's heart raced as they read the message. The storage room wasn't accessible to the public, but it was clear this was a lead they couldn't ignore. They decided to visit the zoo one more time, this time with a clear goal. The plan was risky, but the athlete was prepared to take that risk. Arriving at the zoo, they kept a low profile, blending in with the crowd. They waited until the zookeeper was distracted, then carefully made their way toward the restricted area. Every step felt heavier than the last, their pulse quickening with the fear of being caught. When they reached the storage room, they hesitated for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Inside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of chemicals. The room was filled with supplies, bags of feed, tools, cleaning equipment. At first, it seemed like a dead end, but as the athlete looked closer, they noticed something out of place. In the corner of the room, partially hidden under a tarp, was a small cage. Their breath caught as they approached the cage. Inside was another young animal, smaller and frailer than the one in the main enclosure. Its fur was matted, and it looked up at the athlete with wide, frightened eyes. The sight was heartbreaking. This wasn't just neglect, it was outright cruelty. The athlete quickly took photos and videos, documenting everything. They couldn't risk taking the animal out themselves. It would draw too much attention, but they knew they had to act fast. The evidence they had gathered so far was enough to raise serious questions, but this discovery made the stakes even higher. As they left the storage room, their mind raced with what to do next. They had enough to go public, but they also knew the zoo would fight back hard. The zookeeper, with his carefully curated image, would deny everything, and the zoo's management would likely close ranks to protect their reputation. The athlete needed to ensure their story was airtight before taking the final step. The next few days were a blur of activity. The athlete shared the new evidence with the journalist, who began reaching out to animal welfare organizations for their input. Experts confirmed that the conditions in the storage room were unacceptable, and the treatment of the baby animal was far from the standards expected of a reputable zoo. But as the athlete prepared to make their findings public, they received an ominous warning. An anonymous email arrived in their inbox, simply stating, "Stay out of this. You don't know who you're dealing with." For a moment, the athlete felt a flicker of fear. They had expected pushback, but this felt personal, like someone was watching their every move. Still, they refused to back down. If anything, the threat only strengthened their resolve. The climax was nearing, and the tension was unbearable. The athlete knew they were walking a fine line, but they couldn't let fear stop them. The baby animal and the others suffering in silence needed someone to fight for them. As they prepared to release their findings, the athlete couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything. The night before the athlete was set to release their findings, a strange uneasiness settled over them. Every step of their investigation had been carefully planned, every piece of evidence meticulously documented. Yet the anonymous warning lingered in their mind, gnawing at their confidence. They double-checked their files, ensuring everything was in order. The photos, videos, interviews, it was all there. Still, something felt off. That night, as they scrolled through their social media feed, they noticed a sudden surge of posts from the zoo's official account. The posts were unusually defensive, addressing vague misunderstandings about their operations and praising their staff for their dedication to animal welfare. It was clear the zoo knew something was coming. But how? The athlete had been careful, keeping their investigation under wraps except for a few trusted allies. Then came the twist that sent chills down their spine. A breaking news alert flashed on their phone. The headline read, "Beloved local zoo accuses high-profile athlete of defamation." The article detailed a statement from the zoo, claiming they had been made aware of baseless accusations being spread by a public figure. Without naming the athlete directly, the statement painted a picture of someone trying to damage the zoo's reputation for personal gain. The zoo even included testimonials from staff members, though none from the zookeeper, in question praising the facility's care and commitment to its animals. The athletes stared at the screen in disbelief. How had the zoo found out? And why were they striking first? This wasn't just a counterattack, it was a preemptive move meant to discredit them before they could reveal the truth. The next morning, the athlete's phone buzzed nonstop with messages from reporters, fans, and even a few close friends. Some expressed support, but others asked if the accusations were true. The zoo's narrative was spreading fast, and the athlete realized they were now fighting an uphill battle. Determined not to back down, they decided to accelerate their plans. They contacted the journalist, urging them to release the story immediately. But when the journalist answered, their voice was tense. "We have a problem," they said. The journalist explained that several key sources, including the former employee who had provided critical information, were suddenly backing out. One source claimed they had been threatened, while another simply stopped responding altogether. It was clear someone was working behind the scenes to silence anyone who might speak out. The athlete felt a wave of frustration and fear. The evidence they had was strong, but without witnesses willing to come forward, the story might not carry the weight it needed. They needed a new plan, and fast. As they brainstormed their next move, an unexpected ally reached out. It was the anonymous zoo employee who had tipped them off about the storage room. This time, they wanted to meet in person. The athlete hesitated, unsure if it was a trap, but their instincts told them to trust this person. They arranged to meet in a quiet park after dark. The employee arrived, their face partially obscured by a hood. They looked nervous, glancing over their shoulder every few seconds. "I don't have much time," they said. "But you need to know something. It's bigger than just the zookeeper." The athlete's heart raced as the employee explained. The zoo had been cutting corners for years, prioritizing profits over animal welfare. The zookeeper's behavior was just the tip of the iceberg. Animals had been neglected, funds meant for their care had been diverted, and anyone who questioned the practices was quickly silenced. The employee handed the athlete a small flash drive. "This has everything," they said. "Internal emails, budget reports, even footage from security cameras. But be careful. If they find out you have this, they'll come after you." The athlete thanked the employee and promised to protect their identity. As they walked away, the weight of the situation hit them. This wasn't just about one baby animal or one zookeeper anymore. It was about exposing a system of corruption that had gone unchecked for years. But as they reviewed the files on the flash drive later that night, they realized the stakes were even higher than they'd thought. One video showed the baby animal being roughly handled by the zookeeper, but it also revealed something else: other staff members walking by without intervening. It wasn't just neglect, it was a culture of complicity. The athlete knew they had to act quickly. The zoo's smear campaign against them was gaining traction, and time was running out to reveal the truth. But with the new evidence in hand, they also knew they had the power to change everything if they could survive the storm that was coming. The athlete barely slept that night, their mind racing with everything they had uncovered. The flash drive was a treasure trove of evidence, but it also came with a heavy burden. Every file, every video, every email painted a damning picture of the zoo's operations. The baby animal wasn't the only victim, there were others, all suffering in silence behind the scenes of what the public believed was a haven for wildlife. The next morning, the athlete met with the journalist in person, sharing the contents of the flash drive. The journalist's face grew grim as they scrolled through the files. "This changes everything," they said. "But it also makes it more dangerous. If we go public with this, they'll fight back harder than ever." Despite the risks, they both agreed it was time to act. The journalist began preparing an in-depth expose, while the athlete reached out to a well-known animal rights organization. Together, they planned a coordinated release of the evidence, ensuring it would be seen by as many people as possible. As the deadline approached, the athlete received another anonymous message. This one was different, short, cryptic, and chilling. It read, "You think you know the whole story, but you don't. Be careful who you trust." The message rattled them, but they pushed forward. On the day of the release, the athlete held a press conference, flanked by representatives from the animal rights organization. Cameras flashed as they stepped up to the podium, their heart pounding. They spoke with passion and conviction, detailing the abuse and neglect they had uncovered and calling for accountability from the zoo. The journalist article went live at the same time, complete with photos, videos, and the damning evidence from the flash drive. Social media erupted as people shared the story, expressing outrage and demanding answers. The zoo quickly issued a statement denying the allegations, but the evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss. For a moment, it seemed like the tide was turning. News outlets picked up the story, and public pressure mounted. The zoo announced that it was launching an internal investigation and placed the zookeeper on temporary leave. It felt like a victory, but the athlete couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. That night, they received a call from the anonymous zoo employee. Their voice was panicked. "You need to see something," they said. "Meet me at the park." Now, the athlete hurried to the meeting spot, their mind racing with possibilities. When they arrived, the employee handed them another flash drive. "I found this after you left," they said. "It's from the zoo's private security system. It's worse than we thought." The athlete rushed home to view the files, their stomachs sinking as they watched the footage. One video showed the zookeeper, not just rough with the baby animal, but actively intimidating it, using loud noises and aggressive gestures to keep it in line. Another video showed the zoo's management meeting behind closed doors, discussing how to cover up the abuse and spin the narrative in their favor. The most shocking footage, however, came from the night before the press conference. It showed the zookeeper and another staff member entering the baby animal's enclosure after hours. The baby animal was nowhere to be seen, and the cage was empty. The athlete's blood ran cold. They immediately called the journalist, who confirmed that the zoo had announced the baby animal was being relocated for its safety. But the video told a different story. The zookeeper's body language was tense, and the other staff member looked nervous. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't for the baby animal's well-being. The athlete knew they had to act fast. They contacted the animal rights organization, who mobilized a team to investigate the baby animal's whereabouts. Meanwhile, the journalist updated their article with the new footage, exposing the zoo's attempt to hide the truth. As the story broke, public outrage reached a fever pitch. Protesters gathered outside the zoo, demanding answers. The zoo's management scrambled to contain the damage, but it was too late. Whistleblowers from within the organization began coming forward, sharing even more evidence of misconduct. In a final twist, it was revealed that the zookeeper had been quietly moved to another facility owned by the same organization, a desperate attempt to shield him from accountability. But the athlete and their allies weren't about to let that happen. They worked with legal experts to file formal complaints, ensuring the zookeeper and the zoo's management would face consequences. The baby animal was eventually found, rescued from a small, hidden facility where it had been kept in isolation. It was malnourished and scared, but alive. The athlete was there when it was transferred to a sanctuary, a place where it could finally receive the care and love it deserved. As the athlete watched the baby animal take its first tentative steps in its new home, they felt a wave of relief and gratitude. The fight had been long and grueling, but it had been worth it. The baby animal was safe, and the truth was finally out. But as they turned to leave, their phone buzzed with another anonymous message. This one was just as cryptic as the last. "This isn't over. Watch your back." The athletes stared at the screen, a mix of exhaustion and determination in their eyes. They didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was certain: they were ready to face it. In the weeks following the baby animal's rescue, the athlete found themselves caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Relief at having saved the animal was quickly overshadowed by the lingering weight of the anonymous warning. They couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was still watching, waiting for an opportunity to retaliate. But for now, the focus was on ensuring the baby animal received the care it needed to heal. The sanctuary became a beacon of hope for the baby animal. Its caretakers were gentle and patient, giving it the time and space to adjust to its new surroundings. Slowly, the baby animal began to trust again. The first time it approached a caretaker willingly, the athlete was there to witness it, their hearts swelling with pride and joy. This moment was a reminder of why they had fought so hard, why they had risked so much. The public response to the expos was overwhelming. Donations poured into the sanctuary, and calls for reform in zoos across the country grew louder. The zoo where it all began faced mounting legal and financial pressure. Investigations revealed years of mismanagement and neglect, leading to the resignation of several high-ranking officials. The zookeeper, whose actions had sparked the entire ordeal, was charged with animal cruelty and banned from working with animals in the future. Despite these victories, the athlete couldn't rest easy. The anonymous warnings haunted them, and they couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to uncover. Determined to find answers, they reached out to the anonymous zoo employee one last time. The employee, still nervous but grateful for the athlete's efforts, agreed to meet again. During their conversation, the employee revealed a shocking detail. The organization that owned the zoo was part of a larger network of facilities, many of which operated under the same questionable practices. The baby animal's case was just one example of a widespread problem. The athlete realized their fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. With this new information, the athlete partnered with animal rights groups to launch a broader campaign for transparency and accountability in the zoo industry. They worked tirelessly, using their platform to amplify the voices of whistleblowers and push for stricter regulations. The campaign gained traction, drawing support from celebrities, activists, and everyday people who wanted to see change. As the movement grew, the athlete found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. They thought about the baby animal, now thriving in the sanctuary, and the countless other animals still waiting for their chance at freedom. They thought about the people who had risked everything to help expose the truth and the power of collective action. Months turned into years, and the athlete's efforts began to pay off. New laws were passed to protect animals in captivity, and more sanctuaries were established to provide safe havens for those rescued from abusive conditions. The organization that had owned the zoo was forced to undergo a complete overhaul, with new leadership committed to ethical practices. Through it all, the athlete remained humble, always crediting the team of people who had made it possible. They knew they couldn't have done it alone, and they were grateful for the support and solidarity they had found along the way. One day, as they visited the sanctuary, they saw the baby animal playing with others in its enclosure. It was a sight that filled them with hope, a reminder that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The caretaker approached them with a smile, saying, "You made this happen. Never forget that." The athletes smiled, but their thoughts drifted to the anonymous messages that had started it all. They never did find out who had sent them or why. Perhaps it was someone from within the organization, someone who had wanted to see justice done but couldn't come forward openly. Or perhaps it was a stranger, moved by the baby animal's plight and determined to make a difference. In the end, the mystery didn't matter as much as the outcome. The baby animal was safe, and the world was a little brighter for it. The athlete knew there was still work to be done, but they also knew they weren't alone in the fight. As they walked away from the sanctuary, the sun setting behind them, they felt a sense of peace they hadn't known in a long time. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. And while the road ahead might still hold challenges, they were ready to face them, knowing that even the smallest actions could spark change. The story of the baby animal became a symbol of hope and resilience, inspiring others to stand up for what was right. And though the athlete's journey had started with one small act of courage, it had grown into something far greater, a movement that would continue to make a difference for years to come. As the athlete turned the corner and disappeared from view, the sanctuary echoed with the sounds of animals at play, a testament to the power of compassion and determination. The fight wasn't over, but for now, there was peace. And that was enough.